Hey Ringside crew, welcome to the internationally known Dudes at Ringside podcast. And now here's your host, Joe, Panther III.
Hey, hello there, wrestling fans. Welcome to another episode of the internationally known Dudes at Ringside podcast. I am Joe Panther III, and we are in the middle of Women's Wrestling Month here in February. And I'm adding another awesome professional wrestler from Australia to my wall of fame of awesome Australian wrestlers. It always goes back to, at the Dust It Off all the time, the one and only Savannah Summers. Because if it wasn't for her, she kind of opened up the door for me for the Australian wrestlers to come on this podcast. Once again, thanks, Savannah. Always a pleasure. You're a sweet person. But today, I have a young lady that is blazing a trail for herself. She's just starting out in the wrestling business. Introduce yourself to my internationally known audience.
Hi, I'm LiLi Edea, and I'm based in New South Wales. Pardon me, in Australia.
Awesome. So what were your first experiences within the professional wrestling business?
So do you mean like how I got into it when I was younger or how I started training as an adult?
Let's go back. Like, what was your first experience watching wrestling? What was your first match you watched?
Ooh, interesting. So I think my first experience with wrestling happened before like I was even conscious enough to know what wrestling was. And when I was a baby, there used to be like a plush toy of Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, in my cot as a baby. Which is funny because my parents honestly don't actually like wrestling. So I have no idea why they had that if they didn't like it. Then my first exposure to professional wrestling itself happened at a friend's sleepover. Like I was staying over at my friend's house in primary school, which I think in the US you guys call elementary school. In Australia, we're split between two levels, like primary school, high school, rather than elementary, middle, and high. So I think the American equivalent might have been like the beginning of middle school. And she had an older brother that really liked wrestling. So we went to the, showing my age here, we went to the video store to rent movies. And the video that he rented was Bad Blood with the Hell in a Cell match with Triple H and Shawn Michaels. So that was like my first introduction. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. What is this? Why have my parents never told me about this? So I went back home and I was like, Mom, you can believe what I watched at my friend's house. How do I find more of this? And she was like, oh, dear God, how did you find this? Who showed you this? And that basically like sparked like a hyperfixation interest where any week I would usually go to the video store once a week to get weekly movies. And there would always be some sort of wrestling pay-per-view that I would then start watching.
Awesome. So after you watched the Bad Blood pay-per-view, went home and your parents were like, ugh. How long did it take you to find the wrestling school that you trained at?
Oh, that's going to be a really, really long time, like almost double the age that I was when I found it. Because, yeah, I had like a very strong interest in professional wrestling as a young teenager. My mom would sometimes on the school holidays when like either couldn't find a babysitter because we didn't really do babysitting, but also didn't want to leave me alone at home because I wasn't quite old enough for that yet. So she would take me into work with her and I would, have to like fold envelopes or something like that for the day. And her coworkers would come around and they'd be like, oh, are you going to be just like your mom? Are you going to work in an office one day when you grow up too? And I was like, no, I'm going to be a professional wrestler. So apparently that they got a few laughs out of that around the office. But then what happened? So that was quite a long time ago in Perth. And I know that Perth now has a professional wrestling school, EPW. And also Dude Where's My Ring as well is another promotion down there. There's a few promotions in Perth now. But at that time, I don't think I even had the internet in my house until I was 13. So I knew very, 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 very little about actual close to me professional wrestling. Because in my mind, it was like an American thing. And I eventually, just through like having to get a full-time job, all that kind of stuff that comes with adulthood, just kind of fell a bit out of it. And it wasn't until, where am I now? 2019, I think between 2018 and 2019, I've got a really good friend of mine who I often go and visit and just like hang out at their house, and I like stay over at theirs for the weekend, that sort of thing. And they would always talk about like their hyperfixations New Japan Pro Wrestling. So that's where I really got back into it again, was they were always bugging me to like watch it with them. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I mean, like, I'm always happy to kind of see what my friends are interested in. And they would always talk about like Hiroshi Tanahashi, go Ace. And the weekend that I came over, I remember watching like a few different matches, a show that was alive that weekend. I can't remember the specific show. And they kind of sat me down. They're like, okay, here's the entire active New Japan roster. Pick your favorite. So I ended up going with Tanahashi. It's like everybody loves a good solid babyface face of the company. And I also picked Zack Sabre Jr., who to this day is still like one of my favorite professional wrestlers of all time.
Awesome. So did you ever, you said you really, with the wrestling, did you ever go to like an independent wrestling show before you actually got into the stuff?
Honestly, no, because like it's a interesting market in terms of Australia, and obviously since I've started training, I've learned so much more about it. But I just genuinely, for lack of information, did not know it existed here. I think part of that was because in my first phase of pro wrestling, I was like a teenager. Social media didn't exist. The internet wasn't like the thing that it is now. So I just generally didn't have access to that kind of information. And again, I was still living with my parents, obviously, as like a 13-year-old. And again, my parents were very much not into pro wrestling. So I doubt they would have taken me if I knew and wanted to go. And then as I came back into it as an adult, the interesting thing for me was the way I found out about like more of Australian pro wrestling. I knew of Madison Eagles because she was such a trailblazer for women's professional wrestling, especially from Australia within America. So I knew of her from the PWI rankings, that she was the first wrestler in the women's rankings to not be from the WWE or TNA at the time, like not a major televised American promotion. So I knew her from that. And then when my friend showed me New Japan, there's a guy called Robbie Eagles, who at the time was tagging with Will Ospreay. And I was like, oh, Robbie Eagles, is he related to Madison Eagles? And then she was like, bro, she trained him. And I was like, okay, the more you know. Yeah. Yes, the more you know. So that really became my introduction to how I discovered PWA. So PWA is the place that Madison Eagles basically runs the school. Robbie Eagles is one of the coaches, and it's basically where like a lot of the best wrestlers that you are seeing now in America, either they trained there or they've like worked their promotions whilst they were in Australia. So I initially was in a different state in 2020. I came back to New South Wales in 2022, and ever since I came back, a huge reason why I came back was also to train at PWA, because basically it is the best place in the country.
Awesome. So when you finally got into the school and you sat down, did you feel like that was home for you, or did it take like a few weeks?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Because like when I was in a different state, I reached out to them in 2021 to be like, hey, I'm from a different place, but I'm coming back to New South Wales to visit friends and family. Would it be possible for me to potentially join a training session and possibly if you do private coaching, is Madison Eagles available? Because, try not to be a massive mark, but I am. And at the time, she wasn't with the school, but they were like, oh, Mick Moretti is available and he'd be happy to have you for a training session. So Mick Moretti also a very, very big influence within Australian wrestling, and he's had a massive impact both here and also in helping to really get Australian wrestlers known overseas as well. So when I had that training session with him, it was phenomenal, because like that is a man who knows his shit, for lack of a better way to describe it. So there were like certain things that just, weren't clicking or whatever. And it's like the way I described it was like one coaching session with him was worth 3 months of general coaching. So he's phenomenal. And that moment was kind of like this is where I really want to be. This is a huge contributing factor for me coming across and like making this my permanent school. So in terms of it feeling like home, that's an interesting question, because like there's about 100 plus people who train here. It's like, because it's like the elite place within Australia, it can be like a very, very high standard. And of course, I do my absolute best when I'm in the ring. I do my absolute best at training, and I throw myself into it wholeheartedly, because this is like the thing that I'm so, so passionate about in my life. And then it kind of raises very like philosophical kind of points of view in terms of how do you feel and how do you cope when you, on your absolute best day, giving your heart and soul, barely might measure up to someone who could potentially be the next Robbie Eagles, and like I wouldn't even be them on their worst day of training. So that then provides an interesting dynamic, but at the same time, there's nowhere else I would want to be.
Awesome. So what was the first bump you ever took in the training? And was it something you were like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to wake up to this one tomorrow?
That's actually really, really funny. So initially I started training in a different state. And I had to hide that I do pro wrestling from my parents, because at the time I was living with them like pandemic era, and they were not big on me wanting to do wrestling, because I have past health conditions, which I can go into. It's a very long story, but I'm always very happy to like rant about it, rabble about it. It's a non-issue for me to speak about. But like, long story short, I've had a history of 6 collapsed lungs before. Spontaneous, no reason for it, with a bunch of surgeries, and I use a specific type of inhaler. It's the red steroid rapid inhaler. So my mom was like, "Are you fucking
Don't
insane?"
take a baseball. I promise I'll never throw a baseball. So you can just hit it. You'll hit it with steroids. Boom.
Yeah.
Just
I wish it gave me that kind of super strength. But it's almost like I need steroids for my lungs to function at like a semi-normal capacity, whereas you give someone else steroids and they go on to become like the New York Yankees.
Oh, come on. I'm a Yankee fan. That hurts. Burns.
Ooh, that's not good.
Ouch. We don't do that anymore. We have Aaron Judge. He's won the MVP 2 times in a row.
How's losing the World Series?
Oh, I would hurt. Burn. I still look at my hat. I bought the World Series hat before the World Series, and like I was so excited because haven't been there in a long time, and I went out. I gave my mom my credit card. We bought 3 of us, me and my sister and my mom. My dad didn't want one because my dad doesn't like getting new hats. The hats didn't burst. This will be the biggest burn. You're gonna smell bacon in 3, 2, 1. We didn't get the hats till 3 days after the World Series was over.
Hat.
Yes, I was like, oh,
salt in the wind.
Yes, I thought I smelled bacon. I thought I heard a Puerto Rican crying.
It's like, do you want some aloe vera for that burn?
Oof, I need more than that. I'm gonna need a Delaware. Where I live, it's called the Delaware River. I'm gonna need that size aloe vera for a while. It still burns. Yeah.
But yeah, long story short, it was just like my parents have, I wouldn't say overprotective, because there's a reasonable amount of concern that would exist for that. But I managed to hide it for a few months, and then I ended up coming home with too many bruises on my body to like keep saying, "Oh, I fell over at the gym," and I kind of caved and had to tell them what I'd been up to for the last few months.
Wow.
Yeah. So the first bump I took, I think that was a standard back bump, and it was like they. I don't know how to describe, because I took up jiu-jitsu along with wrestling to make my chain better, because that was just such a big thing that never clicked in my brain until I like had to go out and find another way to learn it that wasn't necessarily the way they taught it at the school. So the way that they teach the back bump is very similar to how you break fall in jiu-jitsu. So I found that quite easy. And then it was like you had to, one of the guys basically did a table and you had to sit on him and then fall off his back and then break your fall. So that would like be the standard first bump that I took. And I was just like, yeah, this is cool. Yeah, I can do this. You hear so many people who show up to their first training session, they're like, ooh, ow, ooh, I took a bump. Ooh, this isn't for me, actually. And I'm just like, no more.
Oof. That means you must have sounded like that lady in the meme when that falls out of the that's doing the grapes, and she's like doing the grape. You know the meme I'm talking about, the lady with the grapes, and she's crushing the grapes on the news, and she falls out of the bucket and falls off the stage. It's going ooh ah ooh ooh oh no, it's bad.
Can't say I've heard that meme reference, but I do know the one where it's like Peter Griffin who's just like. But for me, it wasn't like that. It was like the whole point was that I took the bump and I was like, oh yeah, I'm fine.
I've always
like,
been told. Yeah, I've been told since my grandfather was a wrestler, Joe, you should go into training. And I'm like, 40 years old. I'm on my feet all day long in the job I have. I'm not able to sit down at work that much. And when I am, I'm hyperactive. I'm just running around like a kid after getting a sugar pop in the middle of the summer. I'm like Ultimate Warrior, literally walking around the hallways of a senior home. Yeah. So let's go a little bit further. When they gave you the green light for your very first match, because I know you're in a few matches deep, did you have your whole persona down yet, or was it slowly getting put together slowly?
I would say that it took a while for me to find the right persona that I have now. By the time that the first match happened, the character was kind of already there. I've talked about it a little, like just on my own social medias, that between the day that I first went to my first training session in 2020 to when I had my first match, it was 1,396 days worth of training, which is definitely longer than standard. So on one hand, that's just like, that is a huge amount of time to have to wait. But on the other, it definitely helps prepare you for that moment. So it wasn't just like I was in the ring not knowing who I am or not knowing what I was doing. I had a decent idea on like what I wanted to do and who I wanted to present as.
That's like, for most people, being a professional wrestler is like their thing. So in 5 words, how would you describe what you do to my American wrestling fans? Like, how would you gain them as a fan if you give them give me 5 words?
Oh, 5 words as well. That's quite specific. God, you put me on the spot with that one.
Sorry.
How would I do this? Let me just like have to try and count in my head.
You can give me 4. You don't have to do 5 because some people don't have 5.
I'll go with 5, and I'd say unapologetic and authentic autistic representation.
Okay. I saw something in one of your things, the videos I saw on your Instagram, and I noticed there was ballet shoes.
Yes.
Are you professionally trained in the ballet?
Somewhat. Like before I got into professional wrestling, when I did, my previous hobby had been doing like ballet classes. So was I like a prima ballerina? Not quite. But it is like something that I ended up incorporating into my persona because it was like something that was kind of just naturally there, wasn't really being done by many other people. So it helps to stand out. And it was, again, something that kind of just translated into the ring unintentionally. So for example, if you do like rolls, the way that I would sometimes get up from a roll would be like I'd roll forward, stand up, and then end up going almost on point, like being up on my tiptoes to like balance myself straight before I went into the next thing. And like when I went up on, I think it's releve, one of the coaches was like, "Oh yeah, that's very ballet, very," like I'd get comments from some of the other trainees be like, "Oh, it's very graceful." So I was like, "Oh, well, if that's how I'm naturally moving in the ring already, then it almost makes sense for me to incorporate that somehow into what I'm doing."
Is there any wrestlers from Australia that you've been watching on the social medias or you've seen on the YouTubes that you really want to work with that you haven't had an opportunity to like meet them?
I think that's a really interesting question, because with wrestling in Australia, there's really so many, especially that a lot of people might not even know about, especially if your audience is American. So you've got your bigger names, like you've got your Delta, who's now Zarya in NXT.
I still call her Delta.
Of
Like
course, I have.
I have, because people that know me that watch wrestling, they all look at me and ask me if I've interviewed them before, if I know them. He's like, and then when they mentioned Zarya, I immediately looked at them and I went,
Who's
Delta.
that? Oh, Delta.
And I went Delta, and they went like this. In my head, one of the guys jokingly says, "Joe, I just want to mafia." Well, every time I say a wrestler's name and you say the other name, I just want to lights off, mafioso into a sleeper hold, and put a bag on your head, put you in the trunk, and throw you off the river because you know too much about outside of the country wrestling, Joe. And I'm like, don't be jealous.
So yeah, there's just like, I could go on for so many names in terms of how many Australian wrestlers have like managed to go overseas and are making like really big names for themselves and making really big names for like Australian wrestling. And then there's so many people who are involved here that like I could easily see following their footsteps, because they're equally as hardworking, equally as talented, and it's just such a competitive market. A big name that I have on like my I want to work with wrestling. We very briefly mentioned it before we actually started recording the podcast, because you have Dude Where's My Ring and Dudes at Ringside podcast. So Michelle Hasluck, they're based over in Western Australia. I'm very interested in deathmatch wrestling.
Really?
So, huge. That's like definitely the kind of direction that I want to go in the longer term. So Michelle has been someone who I've been lucky enough to have a few conversations with, and so they're like a pioneer in terms of women's wrestling, because they started quite a while ago as well. So they've been in this industry for a very long time. They know what they're doing. They know what it's like, and they've been able to give me like advice and feedback in times when I've been like, "Ooh, is this actually for me?" sort of thing. So they've been a very good mentor type of figure for me. There's other wrestlers in deathmatch who I'd also really love to work with. Like there's Vixen, who's based out in Victoria, Melbourne area. I've met them before. And it's very funny when you talk about deathmatch, because it's like, we're going to beat the crap out of each other and try and kill each other in the ring. And then I'll be like, "Oh, she's actually really lovely. She's really nice. I'd love to work with her." And a huge name. Like you can't talk about deathmatch wrestling in Australia and like paving the way without talking about Charlie Evans. So yes, Charlie Evans, Chebs, if you will, huge name that I would love to step into the ring with someday.
So you talk about you want to do the deathmatch scene. Are you ready to wake up the next day and then get in the shower, hear a bling, and look at the ground and there's glass?
Or that would be that like this is a very interesting topic for me to talk about, because like with deathmatch it can go it's such a polarized field within wrestling, where you've got people who are like, it's an abomination to this industry and you only go into that if you can't even wrestle. And I think that that's why I hold the three I've mentioned so far, but especially Charlie Evans, in such high esteem, is because there is such a stigma, there is such a stereotype against it. But if you put Charlie Evans in a ring and you take away all the weapons, that's still one of the best wrestlers in the world. So I kind of have that kind of standard for myself, not that I think that I could realistically get to that level, but the idea that when I do eventually get to being capable of doing deathmatch, that it's not seen as me being like, oh, she couldn't hack it in real wrestling, so she has to go off and do this sideshow carny bullshit.
Yeah.
And in terms of the pain tolerance, like that is such a huge thing for me for wrestling in general. Because like when I took it up, and I was talking about that before in terms of taking a background, I was like, this is nothing. I have had a few injuries so far in my time as a wrestler. If I hold my hands up to the screen, you can see it here.
Yeah.
That there's that little indent, and then like this is a normal fist. This is a fist that has been broken in 2 places.
I could see it. Like when you did this, I could see the
indent.
Yeah.
So I've broken my hand in 2 places in wrestling before. And when that happened, I was just like, oh, I think I injured my hand. That's not good. I should probably go get that checked out. Like, I wasn't crying. I wasn't in a lot of pain. And then I ended up needing to take 2 to 3 months out recovery because, you know, you got to let it heal properly before you try to get back into it. Otherwise, you re-injure it and then you have to start the healing process all over again. But yeah, for me, like pain tolerance, that is a very interesting part of wrestling for me. And it's like I would love to kind of push my body to see what its limit is, and I feel like deathmatch is such a huge way to do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that as you said, they bash it. Like I have my dad, which is the son of a former like golden era wrestler, and he follows me. He's my dad, of course. He like supports me 100% with Dudes at Ringside, and he'll send me like match clips. He'll send me blunders. He'll send me the death match thing. I'll come up the next morning for my coffee and my breakfast, and he's on his iPad, and he's like, "Did you get that video I sent you yesterday?" I was like, I kind of play it off like I don't know what he's talking about, and I'm like, "Which one?" He goes, "You know, the one with the glass." And I'm like, "Yeah, I got it, Dad." He goes, "What the fuck do they call that wrestling?" I'm like, "Dad."
It's very much a thing that I just summarize it as like, you get it, you don't, you don't. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not particularly interested in making converts out of people who are the kind of people to talk about it that way. Because it's like, you know, if it's not for you, it's not for you. And it's not going to be me or any other person that's changing your mind about it. But it's more just like, when I first really learned about deathmatch wrestling in Australia in 2021, when I first saw that, and I was like, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm doing this for.
Yep. So, if my fans want to follow you on social media, how can they find you?
Oh, it's pretty easy to find. So LiLi, spelled Lili, and then Edea is the surname Edea. I'd say the most active on Instagram. You can also find me on Twitter, which is now X, and I am on the other one, Blue Sky, if anyone is trying to jump over there as well. I'm pretty much where like most social medias exist.
If my fans from the States or anybody, if there's any Australian wrestling fans watching this, welcome aboard. Hello. They want to buy any merch, like a 8x10 or anything. Do you have any of that stuff yet?
I actually don't, because like I mentioned, I only just made my debut. So I had my first match September 14 against the PWA heavyweight champion, Jessica Troy. And she won. So it was a great moment for me. It was like such a special moment that I will always actually treasure that match. One of the most, for me, that was like one of the best accomplishments of my life, was training so long for something and actually sticking it out and not quitting and still being here after it. Like, that was just such a huge, huge thing for me. So I had that as my first match. It was at a kind of like a festival event. And then there was another festival event that happened about a month later or so. I was in a tag team match there. And then my most recent match I had was last week. And I think that's my first experience in the ring of kind of like disappointing myself and not being as good as what I like. You know, I put all that time into training. You should actually be good by, you know, close to 4 years after. What kind of match was that? That was terrible. What are you even doing? That kind of like headspace afterwards. But, you know, I'm still here. I've still got another match coming up in December 14. So I'm still very much in my green early stages of the career. If people are interested in like following along and seeing how it goes, more than welcome to follow the journey as it progresses. And basically my philosophy is doing it for as long as I can at the best ability that I can. Like, whenever I'm in the ring, even if the opponent is essentially wiping the floor with me or running circles around me, I'm giving 100% of what I have.
Awesome. If there was any young fans that are looking to join the business like you did, what kind of advice would you have for them?
Go to a good school. Go to a good school. Do your research. Learn about the coaches. Who else have they trained? What have the people that they've trained gone on to do? And like, I don't want to be elitist because I understand that everyone's journey in professional wrestling is different. But if it is accessible for you, if it is at all possible for you, PWA or anything affiliated with PWA, like they get the reputation that they have as being the best for a very, very good reason. Like Madison Eagles is the best coach in the world. You could go anywhere in the world and you would not find anyone at her level.
Awesome. When you get a chance, when you go see Madison, tell her Joe Panther III says hi. I would love to have her on the podcast. If you're watching Madison, hey, I'm Joe Panther III, American-based independent wrestling fan, grandson of a wrestler from the Golden Era, Jose Quinones, the Panther, the original. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Definitely, I would like to have you back on again for the year in 2024, but like you have a little more to talk about, and we could probably go live. I'm Joe Panther III. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your outro there.
It's okay. I'm Joe Panther III.
And I'm LiLi Edea.
And we will catch you in the next one.